Hi there.
Hello. Tom and Lana are tuning in for our Sunday Live.
And Mercury.
And Mr. Mumu, Merkan Turkan Rinpoche. So today we got a couple of questions last week from people. And one thing that was recurring, which I sort of was feeling funky about talking because people were asking me about my experience with plant medicine and entheogens. You know, and that's a little bit of a tricky subject to discuss for various reasons. And then Tom came up with the idea that we should just turn this live because we did want to address that. So we decided to turn this live into this discussion on ecstasy in the context of spiritual practice.
And to paraphrase Mircea Eliade, which I can never pronounce correctly.
Mircea Eliade. I can because I'm coming from Slavic background.
Mircea Eliade, as I like to say. The Techniques of Ecstasy. This is the subtitle to the book on shamanism that he wrote that is really a very, very fascinating and important text, kind of unfolding shamanism. But really the point here is to talk about the techniques of ecstasy. And we're not talking about just joy and pleasure, but religious ecstasy. And this is a very key concept that goes back, you know, in the literature, religious literature, philosophy. Experiences of ecstasy are very common for the religious milieu. And William James wrote a famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is a bit of a catalog of different types of experiences, including a lot of different permutations of ecstasy. What does ecstasy mean in this context? Often what we're talking about is the reduction of awareness of the outside experience with an elevation of a personal experience of content within. And generally, this also is accompanied with a reduction of the ego and an experience of something greater than the small self.
So I also want to mention, just before we start talking about consumption of things that bring about ecstasy, ecstatic states within oneself. There are a couple of things. First of all, these things are not recommended for everybody. There are many different paths to divine union. And my personal path has been to integrate different things. I'm kind of an experimenter. I try everything. And I see what works. And then I just use what works, right? But there are definitely, this is like a treacherous path. These sort of shamanic methods can be a quick path, but they're also double-edged swords. What does this mean? It means that for one person, it can kind of provide an opportunity to move faster towards the goal, and for the other person, it can actually set them back. It can create delusions and problems, and it can really put people, in a kind of jeopardized mental state. So it's really important to mention that particularly when it comes to use of entheogens to deliver those kinds of states, one has to be in a really good balanced mental state. People who are having challenges with sort of mental illness or anything like that. Maybe even people who have a really intense traumatic experience, who have not processed that. I would say there's potential challenge with that. And I think for people who have those issues and want to explore those sorts of avenues, my suggestion would be to start working with therapists who use these elements in healing.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, so you want to be, it's if you can't navigate this reality properly, if you can't manage your emotions, if you can't keep yourself from, say, harming yourself or others, then you're probably not ready to navigate these other states, which are much more difficult to navigate, actually.
Yes.
Because we have less control. We kind of lose touch with our rational capacity even more. And, so...
And I think, there's a lot of different kind of precautions that one would mention, because this is very dangerous technology. And when you're messing with your mind, with your body, with your sense of self, with your perception of reality and the holy or the religious, madness is a very common element in these discussions. And in certain contexts, madness can be viewed as a holy state, but this is generally...
There is a book, Holy Madness, by
Yes.
Furstein.
But this is generally in reference more to a counterculture attitude or an experience that doesn't jive with mundane day-to-day reality. So, it's not to elevate that people suffering from mental illness are somehow, hold a key to enlightenment. Maybe they do. I'm not going to, argue that. But at the same time, it's not to undermine their suffering, and it's not to idealize a state of confusion or dysfunction.
I want to mention this thing about, holy madness is very different from standard madness. In standard madness, or, when someone is the difference is with the regular madness, with people who are suffering from, let's say, very heavy mental illness. Sorry, I have a nose ring that's I just have to do this because I keep doing this, and I'm in the event of people who are in a mental hospital, right? That kind of madness. Those are people who are disconnected from reality. They're not in tune with reality, and that creates state of suffering. So people in those institutions are suffering, and very visibly so. We can see that. Whereas holy madness is about people who have penetrated reality and who act outside of the social
Right.
norms, and social norms are designed to cater to kind of conventions that we created as human beings, saying it's like conventional reality. It's kind of like saying, labeling things in a certain way. Okay, now I'm getting a little bit too heavy into the... But just, okay, let's use an example and say, we have certain conventions. We say, this is beautiful and this is not beautiful, for instance. And then we hold those things to be real, to be real out there. We say this is an objective view. But in actual reality, everything we see and how we experience it is always subjective. It's just that maybe we live in the kind of society that holds those sort of relative truths as objective. But if you go to a tribe somewhere else, they have different standard of beauty, and they're going to say, well, no, that's not beautiful. This other thing is beautiful. So the reality as we see it is organized according to conventions. And when somebody is enlightened, they sort of surpass the ordinary reality. So they live in a kind of different world, and their behaviors will often be seen as potentially irrational or unusual by the normal people. But and those people are in tune with reality, and they're totally free. They don't have these hang-ups. They don't have, they're not trapped by the ego.
And you can see examples of this in Zen koans, where you have these kind of riddles that don't follow a logical pattern. These people behave in ways that, it doesn't follow. This isn't the normal way you would respond to a question. When did the great patriarch come to China? It's time for tea. That's not, that answer doesn't follow, but it's pointing to a greater wisdom, a greater logic. And I'm not going to unpack that koan, but these are the kinds of things we're talking about with madness or holy, the crazy madman, prophet. Mm-hmm. They don't follow a logical sequence in our conventional perceptions of society. However, they point to a deeper, bigger, more dilated understanding, And sometimes it takes a while to understand why somebody would behave in that way. But so maybe to discuss more about the technology itself, the techniques of ecstasy. Of course, entheogens, plants and fungi, and even in some cases animal matter that change our psychodynamics. This is one form of ecstasy. Not all drugs and intoxicants are ecstatic producing. Not all of them always result in that kind of experience for everyone. But things like specifically psychedelics often can be triggering for mystical experiences, for a dilation of the ego and an awareness of something bigger and greater than oneself that leads to a dialogue where you start exploring, researching, looking for your path, that more information comes. In the same way, there's many other techniques that you can use in order to produce these states. Drumming, dancing, spinning like the Sufis,
Bhakti yoga, devotional singing,
devotion, meditation, asana and yoga, sweat lodge experiences, fasting, deep prayer. I mean, the list goes on and on. And the types of experiences that people can generate from these, there's also quite a broad spectrum of things. However, they're all marked by an experience of something greater, something bigger than the self, that the mundane self, let's say. And these techniques, when combined, can actually further one even more quickly. But they're extremely dangerous to combine. And, being in a place that one is ready for these things, it's always very hard to say. So, just as a bit of a caveat, we are not suggesting any of these things. That's, entirely upon your own willingness, your preparedness.
Responsibility.
And a connection to a tradition that's ready to support you if your experiences go beyond what you had expected or hoped.
I also want to mention that there are a lot of traditions where these things have been, entheogens have been very much used, but not in a kind of overt fashion. Mm-hmm. So you could read about like Sufis who have used a certain kind of like psychedelic mushrooms. I've also heard of Sufis using ayahuasca. Then you have different, even in Buddhism, like in Nepal, they have this psychedelic honey. They're like, and throughout history and ages, a lot of people have, and a lot of different traditions have used these things, even though you normally wouldn't associate the two together. There have been yogis and so forth who have, plus yogis also, they smoke stuff.
It depends, like sadhus.
Some, yeah. But again, it becomes a very, I would be very cautious because it becomes so easy for people to, because when we're experiencing altered states, whether we're on drugs or whatever, these are states that veer away from like our normal reality. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy, like especially say on ayahuasca, when people do it, there are a lot of visions at first. And people attribute special meaning to these visions. And it's like, of course you're going to have visions. You've just taken something that will alter your brain chemistry. And the danger is that the ego may hijack the experience and say like, oh, this means that I am somehow special. Like I've known people who started to believe that they are, it's almost like they would fall into an ego trip after doing psychedelics, and then they would carry that into their everyday life and kind of have this inflated sense of self that's not realistic and that actually separates them from reality. So, that's why, we're saying these things are a double-edged sword. So it's important to have, if possible, to have a guide who is much more experienced. Like, I'm working with a shaman who, and even that word nowadays, it's like everybody and their aunt is a shaman. And that's very dangerous. Like, people who are shamans are supposed to be trained, especially in this kind of work, and they have to have a lot, like a lifetime of experience. Like that's the only kind of person I would trust, because I've sat in circles in New York and elsewhere with people who are so-called shamans who ended up just using these circles as a way to, you know, get into women's pants and like take the money, and it's really tragic and it's really dangerous. So
and I think what's important, the spirit that we're trying to capture ourselves, and probably I think would be the intent, is that these experiences give us a moment of pause from our own identities. They give us a little perspective where we can actually see ourselves and how we've chosen to behave, how those choices react in context with other people. They give us these moments to relax our projections onto the world and allow ourselves to experience the world as it is. And when we return from these experiences, the idea is hopefully we have let go of some of the grasping, some of the encrusted boundaries that we've created from ourselves, and we have a moment of actually being bigger. This gives us a chance to grow, to be more present, to be more a part of this reality, as opposed to the little reality we've created in our heads that allow us to navigate through the day. So, you know, the idea is that we come back from an ecstatic experience bigger, further along the path.
Sometimes, oh, sorry, you
and
finish.
Just to say, some of these experiences, they're actually distractions. In Buddhism, there's what's called the 8 dhyana states. They're different states of trance that get deeper and deeper. They're considered a distraction, and they are byproducts of the evolution that one is taking as one progresses along the spiritual path. That doesn't mean they should be ignored completely or resented or, you know, shamed in some way, but they're also not the goal. And the experiences that they produce, like Lana was saying, you have visions, you may have these particular personal revelations or experiences that are highly meaningful, but they can be distractions as well. And so when we grasp to those things and then reify them, make them more and more concrete, I am Jesus, I am, you know, I tasted God and I am now one with him. These types of projections, they just reify that ego even more. So it's important that when we return from ecstatic experience, we give ourselves a chance to incorporate that, to work with it and understand it and actually grow from it. When we, you know, become too obsessive about those experiences and really hold on to them and grasp them, that's counterproductive, you know. What were you going to say?
I have no idea. But, no, because you were talking... Oh, yeah, so you were talking about, like, when you're having this experience, say, on entheogens, and they give you a break from the ego things. Sometimes they give you a break from ego things, but sometimes they accentuate the ego. So sometimes your problems, like, particularly things like ayahuasca, even mushrooms, like, if there is something you're not confronting in your life, it will come up in your face. And this is why, like, certain people who are, so people who are suffering from addiction have found ayahuasca to be very helpful. And there was actually ayahuasca has been used to help people overcome their addiction to, like, lesser drugs, like problematic drugs. Because there is a difference between entheogens and regular drugs. Entheogens... When you take entheogens, you feel bad, and then you feel good, because the experiences can be so intense and difficult. And then with the bad drugs, it's like you take bad drugs, you know, to feel good, but then afterwards you feel actually bad and you feel worse. So
and often in the cultural context, like ayahuasca, the process is called trabajo. It's work. This is not fun. You're not doing this to party down and have a rave and whatever. This is going to cause you discomfort, stress, and personal crisis, hopefully. But that is because you're actually facing yourself in an uncolored, untinted lens. You know, you're seeing yourself for whom you are and your shadow. And in this process, you have an opportunity to start making changes to the self, to align one's behavior, one's patterns, one's projections, to be more and closer to the way things are, and into a healthy, productive way. And this way, as one progresses upon it, allows one to also then start helping others in a more and more greater capacity. But that's, you know, we can't put that on our shoulders in the beginning either. Because like Lana said, we need to be in a state of safety and wellness, functionality, before we can progress on the path. Lama Yeshe said, Dharma is for healthy people. You know,
Yeah.
if you're suffering from a great deal of trauma or
anxiety,
that doesn't mean you're not eligible to work through
Right.
those things.
but you have to deal with those.
But they have to be put to rest first before one can take the further steps toward greater health and wellness. You know, if you have a infection in your lungs, you know, it's not time to start working on pranayama and breathing techniques. First, you
don't go to
heal
the
your
gym.
lungs. Then you can start making progress into the positive. You know.
Also, I want to say what you said about like helping people. That will happen spontaneously,
Yes.
because when we do these things, when we enter, I mean, now we're kind of moved away from the state of from the ecstatic states and more into just entheogens, I guess, because those things. But the point is, when we do these things, well, first of all, intention matters, you know, and like I've known people who will take these things and go party, and like if you use it for that, it will serve that purpose. Sometimes you might get something that you didn't expect and might take you to a bad place, and people call this a bad trip. It's like, no, there is no bad trip, because bad trip means you're given an opportunity to work through something
Right.
that you don't like. And you know, we're so attached to these ideas. It's like, you know, the good experience is the one that feels good, and the bad experience is the one that makes me feel bad. It's like, that's not true. The good experience is the one that ultimately leads you to be more free.
Right.
You know, if like indulging in bliss makes you a bigger jerk and makes you more deluded and makes you more stuck, that was not a good experience. You know, that's just addiction. That's just like, you know, like, I don't want to use keywords that will get flagged, but like it's just like basically doing heavy, horrible drugs that will harm you in the long run.
And if you look at the experiences of Thomas Aquinas or you know, Mahatma Gandhi, or people that have had religious experiences, this changed their lives for the better. And this is the goal, you know.
Some of my most significant experiences, actually, both in life and in sort of altered states caused by psychedelics, have been the most difficult ones, because those were the ones that brought me realizations fastest. You know, it's I mean, I don't know, I'm just like thinking if I should get into personal experience. I mean, I don't have to get too deeply into it, but a lot of I would say the value of some of these, you know, let's say entheogens like ayahuasca and so forth is, you know, as the person that I've been working with the most and that I chose as my soul guide in the kind of shamanic path, because I trust him infinitely, and it's very hard to find trustworthy people who are qualified to facilitate these kinds of ceremonies. You know, he would say that, you know, at the beginning when you're first working with ayahuasca, for instance, we get a lot of visions, and we get so attached to these visions. It's like, wow, it's so cool, you know, but you're also so out of it. You're like kind of halfway out of your body, because even if you like get up to go to the bathroom, it's really difficult to navigate your physical body, because you're out there in the astral world, you know, you're kind of not really, so it's like, but all these visions, these like they take precedence at the beginning, and it's almost like carrot being dangled. It's like distraction, And the shaman that I work with, Dionisio, he says like, this is just the vomit of your mind. It's just projections, and it's like, yes, there is some value in it, because like you can interpret like what is appearing to me and why. But ultimately, you want to go beyond visions and beyond this like colorful stuff, magical city stuff, and you want to go directly into your perception of reality and your sense of self and your sense of your ego. And so my experience has been like the most irrational and suffering experiences that I've had on ayahuasca were the most valuable. And the reason why is because, actually something interesting. There is this one particular experience that comes across for me. And I've had both blissful and torturous experiences. And I also had an experience that was both blissful and torturous. And the reason why is that I experienced it as torture because there was sort of too much, like something that was really difficult for me and painful, and it was kind of anxiety ridden. I recognized it as being kind of divine love being channeled through my body, but my body was not prepared for that level of passage of energy, and it felt like I'm being destroyed, and it's like I felt this agony and angst, and I wanted to annihilate myself. Like there was an impulse of wanting to just annihilate myself because the suffering was so excruciating. But at the same time, I knew that it wasn't sort of inherently painful. It was like divine love being kind of coming through me, and I couldn't handle it. So it was like, it was almost like divine BDSM. I like to, it's like too much love, more than I can handle. It's like too much energy passing through. And that's why, and these experiences, we have them and then we come out of it and we're like, wow, I have a lot of work to do. I have to work on my subtle body. I have to do purification so that I can like prepare myself better, when I do come in touch with these, and...
I think one of the keys that really it comes down to is these experiences. Ecstasy is a word that has taken on this very pleasant meaning in our current culture, but it actually connects with sublimity, this idea of a beauty that also contains pain. And one of the main reasons that this all ties back to shamanism is that these experiences often create what is called an experience of ego death. And this is a very, very important piece of the journey. You just
read my mind. I was... Okay, go ahead.
So in shamanism, often, and this is not blanket statement, but many times, the people selected to become shaman experience something along the lines of ego death at a young age, whether it's through illness or an accident or through ritual and initiation even. Initiation often mirrors the idea of ego death in order to create a sense and a state of dilation of the self in order to allow something bigger to be poured in. So these experiences are cultivated that are very dangerous, but in order to help these people become something bigger. And in certain ways, some people have used analogies that you're actually getting a taste of God, coming back to this mundane reality, and being able to share a little bit of a piece of that with people, whether that's in order to help heal them or guide them along their path in order to reach the same state. But really, what we're talking about, it requires a great deal of effort and intention. So with drugs, it's very easy to put a little thing on your tongue, and now you're stuck. You've got to wait the 8 hours.
The next.
There's no way out. But if you're using something like, well, there is, you could take niacin or something like that. But if you're drumming, dancing, chanting, I mean, most of us have experienced these things, and they didn't result in an experience of God. That's because you have to push yourself further and further beyond the intention of the ego. You keep spinning as a Sufi, and you transcend that space of dizziness and a desire to stop because I feel nauseous. And then something erupts, something bigger happens. All of these techniques are about pushing ourselves beyond our own capacity to become bigger. And that's, again, why it's so dangerous. You're asking for more than you can handle.
Yeah, you have to have healthy ego before you can have ego death. Because, and also I was going to say with ecstasy, and then you jumped in with ego death. It's true, like ecstasy is both, like you said, painful and pleasurable. And the reason why is because a part of you is dying so that you can be kind of open enough to receive that divine kind of
inspiration.
Sort of inspiration, and you can experience a kind of divine ego. By the way, somebody says ego death is Jungian. Does Freud psychology is Freud psychology no longer relevant? So first of all, we're not talking. Ego death. The concept of ego death has existed way before Jung. This is shamanic stuff. Ego
it could even be said to be pre-human in that we've seen Neanderthal and pre-human races experience some forms of religion.
But ego is just a word. It's not like, ego didn't exist before Jung came and named it. That's nonsense. It's like...
It's like saying there was no electric before Benjamin Franklin.
Right. So that's like, you have to let go of these labels. Again, our ego loves to get attached to I'm Jungian, I'm Freudian, and then if somebody says something, it's like, well, what about this? Just let go of it. We're just talking about transcendence. Forget labels. These are just labels. They're not real. They're real. They refer to something. But it's like we're talking about transcending, and ego is a word that represents, like I said before, ego in psychology represents a sense of self. But when we talk about ego in spirituality, we're talking about the sense of self that's threatened and that's fearful and that's inherited from our animal nature, and it's all about being protected, and what I want. I need food. I need, it's like this. That's the stuff that keeps us trapped and gives us problems.
And many religions have posited something along the lines of ego death. In Sufism, there's a concept of diminishing the self to a point of almost suicide in order to allow God or Allah to inhabit the mind, and that one becomes a conduit or a vessel for something holier when one's made the space for it.
And I want to mention that thing about a state of ecstasy being both sort of angst and bliss at the same time. I have a great respect for the Sufis. I don't know so much about that tradition, but I know enough to kind of really be in awe with their practice and philosophy. And I attended their workshops in whirling, like the whirling dervishes. And I learned how to do the process of sort of spinning. And the experience was, once I sort of tasted that, it's very much like that, right? Because it's like you're spinning for a good half hour, and when you finally stop, it's like it's so intense, like you feel nauseous. You're not in a state of feeling in a state of well-being. You're very triggered because all of your senses are this, and you feel nauseous, but at the same time the mind is completely empty. And when I experienced that, I understood why they do this. It's because they're completely, when we do the spinning, and you sit down, you kind of pause, you become like an empty vessel, and you're ready for communion and for meditation. And it's like, and then again, also, it's like this concept, we're willingly suffering for the sake of divine. We are sacrificing something. We're sacrificing our attachment to pleasure and our attachment to kind of just feeling nice, you kind of put something out in order to receive something. And this is kind of an initial training for us to transcend duality, which splits positive and negative into two things. So, we're kind of approaching this non-dual state.
And this is such a human experience that we're choosing something that's unpleasant now for a pleasant result later. You know, this path is saying I am willingly choosing to be uncomfortable, to do something my body doesn't want me to do, or whatever, you know, but with an awareness that this will have a result that is bigger than the me that is irritated by the means now. And so this is a type of forethought that is, to me at least, expresses how evolved this type of process is. This isn't something that is intuitive in the sense of, I want this now, this is making me uncomfortable, I should walk away and stop. You know, this requires an investment and an intention that is broader than the moment, you know.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot here.
Yeah, I think we can stop here. We decided to keep these things a little bit shorter. Usually we go like over an hour, and I just think it's a lot. So we can continue more later. Today was just kind of like a spur of the moment thing, and maybe next time we can be more structured and maybe take any questions and like, because there are many different directions this topic can take. Mm-hmm. So write to us and let us know what elements. Yeah, send us questions, and you know, with personal experience, I'm happy to share some of them. You know, I'm not. Just anything. I like to share anything that I think will be helpful to other people. Mm-hmm. So, but you know, just speaking for the sake of speaking, like, oh man, I had this cool experience. Like it doesn't. Yeah. So. And
bottom line is, be careful, please.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have guidance, especially at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And again, you know. All right. Thank you, guys. And we will. Yes. Say bye, Mr. Mercury, and we'll connect with you next Sunday.